Merriam-Webster defines coincidence as the occurrence of events that happen at the same time by accident, but seem to have some connection. Wikipedia defines it as the remarkable occurrence of events that have no apparent causal connection with one another. Today's okay coincidence is one of those remarkable occurrences. Hold on to your butts, because this is the story of Miss Unsinkable.
Okay, coincidence. Boop.
Today's episode, the very first inaugural episode of Okay Coincidence, is about Miss Unsinkable. And I feel like this is a story that we all need right now. Okay? So here we go. Miss Unsinkable. Who was Miss Unsinkable? Born on October 2nd, 1887, making her a Libra, near Bahia Blanca, Argentina, Violet Jessop was the oldest of 9 children and the first of 6 siblings to survive past childhood. And yes, you heard that right. And unfortunately, at a very young age, she contracted tuberculosis. Now, tuberculosis symptoms in children are not fun. Like, tuberculosis is bad for anybody at any age, but as a kid or like an elderly person, it's worse. So here are some symptoms of tuberculosis that Miss Violet Jessop experienced as a young child, like most likely under 10, because all of the sources I found didn't give an exact age, but I'm gonna guess under 10 when they say a very young age. So respiratory symptoms include persistent cough lasting 3 or more weeks. I'm having flashbacks to a certain coughing up blood and mucus. Could you imagine as a child going through that? Oh my God. Chest pain, shortness of breath, all that, right? And then you've got fever, irritability, loss of appetite, fatigue, all the fun stuff, that happens when you get sick. Yeah, poor little Violet went through all of that at a very young age. And guess what? She surprised everyone, even the doctors, when she managed to recover from tuberculosis. Like, hello, 1800s, late 1800s tuberculosis. Don't want to be me. And if that wasn't enough, when she was a kid, she almost died. And then when she was 16 years old, her father tragically passed away from complications from a surgery. And it also isn't mentioned, and if it was, I didn't see it, what kind of surgery it was, but I can only imagine that it wasn't for something fun, like a cosmetic surgery or, something like that. It was probably very horrible. So then, after he passed away from this surgery, her and her family moved to England. But yeah, she's 16. She's basically a woman back then. So guess what she had to do? As the oldest daughter, she was basically like the second parent to her siblings back then, which is even more evident because while they were in England, she joined a convent school to become a nun. And while she was at that convent school, she was taking care of her youngest sibling while her mom was off at sea as a stewardess. So I can only imagine what that was like, going to school to be a nun and taking care of your youngest sibling like they're your own child. I can't even imagine. Well, I can kind of imagine because when I was 15, my little brother was born. So, I mean, I can understand a little bit, but not to this level. Okay. She was basically like her youngest sister's like second mom, but that was her sister. So then sometime later, her mom got sick and she had to come home from being a stewardess, which meant, guess what Violet had to do? She had to drop out of school and get a job to help out with bills. So obviously mom came home, Violet left school, nun school, to get a job. And like mother, like daughter, guess what she did? She applied to be a stewardess. You know, I can kind of relate to this because growing up, my mom was a teacher, but like an unofficial teacher. And you know, until a couple years ago, that's what I was going to school for, to be a teacher. So that's kind of, you know, okay, coincidence. So she applied to be a stewardess. And here's the craziest part. Okay, did I mention that she was gorgeous? Because she was absolutely stunning. Okay, according to Wikipedia, she had to, quote, dress down to make herself less attractive to be hired. Come on. Can you imagine being that gorgeous to be like, listen, you're too beautiful and we would love to hire you, but you're just way too intimidating to the other girls. And we need you to be ugly so that you can get this job, because we really want to hire you, but we need you to be ugly. So basically, like, it was a thing back then where if you were a working girl, you basically had to be unavailable, is what I'm assuming. And so for her to be like a working girl, she basically had to be ugly, like less attractive, so that, you know, the passengers and the other crew wouldn't want to all the time, you know? Like, she must have been a bad bitch for them to be like, look, you're great and all, but you're way too beautiful. And we need you to, you know, ugly yourself up. Can you gain some weight? You know? I don't know what they were saying, but what would you do if you were told that you had to be ugly for a job? Me, I'd be like, no thanks, I'll go somewhere else. Like, it kind of sounds like a compliment, and then when you think about it, it's like, what? I'm too pretty? But also, I'm not going to change who I am just for this job. I'm a bad bitch, and I'm going to take my bad bitch self where my bad bitch self will be appreciated. So anyways, obviously, you know, times were tough back then, so she did what she had to do. And in 1908, she was hired in her first job as a stewardess, working for the Royal Mail Line, Orinoco. And so I did some research on this, on the Royal Mail Line, and the Orinoco was a passenger and cargo vessel that mainly did obviously transporting like goods and people between Southampton and the West Indies. So that's where she worked, on the Orinoco. You know, it doesn't say what her like specific jobs were as a stewardess, but maybe she was with like the passenger side and not like the cargo side, because she was a woman. So, you know, she got hired in 1908 at 21. Okay, 21, she landed her first job on, on the Royal Mail Line, Orinoco. And then just 3 years later, okay, 3 years later, in 1911, she earned a spot working for White Star Line. Okay, on the lesser known luxury liner, the RMS Olympic. And we all know White Star Line, most of us. So at the time, the Olympic was the largest civilian liner. So it was bigger than the Titanic. So working for the RMS Olympic, Violet experienced her first tragedy. And yes, I said first, as a stewardess. Remember, the story is about Miss Unsinkable. And we're learning about why she earned her nickname, Miss Unsinkable. The first event, okay? While leaving Southampton, Violet experienced her first traumatic event as a stewardess, okay? When the Olympic collided with the British warship, the HMS Hawk. I had to look it up. I couldn't find my spot on my paper. So the Olympic collided with a British warship, the HMS Hawk. Okay, and so basically just sustained damage, and they had to go back to Southampton to get everything repaired and stuff, but nobody died. Okay, traumatic, but it could be worse. Hence where this story is going. So no fatalities were reported on the RMS Olympic, and Violet continued to work for the Olympic until April 1912. Now we know where this story is going, right? So Violet is now 24 years old, okay? And Violet joins the crew of the Titanic on April 10th, 1912. And what happens just 4 days later? The Titanic collided with an iceberg in the middle of the North Sea, okay? And sank a grueling 2 hours and 40 minutes later in the middle of the night, in the middle of the ocean, okay? Freezing cold. They're in BFN, bumfuck nowhere, in the middle of the ocean, right? Freezing cold outside. The ship collides with an iceberg, sustains significant damage. The hull of the ship starts flooding to the point where as the ship starts to sink, the front half of the ship basically breaks off. And so the ship snaps in half and continues to sink. After a grueling, excruciating 2 hours and 40 minutes, that's almost 3 hours, okay? Middle of the ocean, the middle of the night, everybody's freezing, okay? And because she was a stewardess on the Titanic, she was used as a visual example of how to board the lifeboats, right? As everybody's waiting to get on the lifeboats, she's brought over as an example for non-English speaking passengers to be like, hey, here's how to safely get on the lifeboat. Look, it's perfectly safe. Look, they're doing it. You know, you can do it too. And so after she was used as an example, she managed to get onto lifeboat 16. And a crazy part of her time during the Titanic sinking was it was mentioned that as the lifeboat was being lowered down into the water, she was just randomly handed a baby to take care of as the lifeboat was going down. And obviously she kept the baby safe. And so after her and the other survivors were rescued the next day by the Carpathia and taken to New York City, it's said that some random lady ran up to her, snatched the baby out of her hands, and just took off. And She doesn't know if that was her baby or what, but random baby rescued from the Titanic and then just snatched from her, I guess. I don't even know if this story is verified. It's just mentioned a couple times in the research that I did about Miss Violet Jessop. But yeah, so her and the other survivors of the Titanic were taken to New York City, and after some time, she did return back to Southampton, okay? And believe it or not, she kept working as a stewardess, okay? She kept working there. And I applaud her because she had some balls, okay? And I'm sure she wasn't the only one that continued to work for White Star Line, you know, as a stewardess or a steward or whatever on these ocean liners. It's just her story stands out for specific reasons. So after she returned to Southampton, after the whole Titanic shenanigans, okay, now we're jumping forward to World War One. Okay, it's 1916 during World War One, and Violet began working for the British Red Cross. And during this time, a lot of the luxury liners were converted into hospital ships, and she just happened to be working on one of those, the HMHS Britannic, which was a sister ship of the Titanic. And like I said, it was repurposed as a hospital ship during the war. And so she was still a stewardess, but she was a stewardess with nursing duties during the wartime. On November 21st of 1916, the HMHS Britannic sustained significant damage from a mysterious explosion. And the cause of the explosion isn't 100% like verified for sure, but a lot of sources said that it was from like an accidental detonation of like a German naval mine that they just happened to run into. This event, if you can believe it, was probably more traumatic than the Titanic experience because Violet and many others were almost killed, not by the explosion or by the actual like sinking of the Britannic. They almost died because the propellers of the ship were shredding lifeboats as they were coming into its path. And so Violet and others on her lifeboat had to basically jump out of the boat into the open water to escape being shredded by the propellers of the boat, right? And so she ended up sustaining a traumatic head injury from jumping out of the lifeboat to escape being cut up by the propeller blades. Okay? Like, insane. This woman, truly a brave soul. Okay? And I think she discovered later that she had like a concussion, like from, and it's not clear whether she sustained the injury from like jumping into the water or like if she like hit something jumping out. It just said she sustained a traumatic head injury from jumping out of the lifeboats. So she was on the Olympic, right? Then the Titanic, then the Britannic. Okay, so 3 sister ships she was on, and she survived these 3 sister ships having crazy things happen to them. Okay, and after all of that, this was not the end of her life at sea, and it was far from it. Okay, After World War One, so sometime after World War One, you know, around 1920, she continued working for White Star Line again after everything that happened. And then after some time, she went to work for the Red Star Line. And then she had her full circle moment working for the Royal Mail Line once again. And she retired in 1950 from her sea time adventures. And outside of her life as a stewardess, in her time at sea, she married a fellow White Star Line steward named John James Lewis. But I think she realized how much of a strong, independent baddie she was, because they divorced around a year later. So like just over a year later, they were like, nope, we're done. Don't know if it was her or him, but you know, good for her. Good for her. She's a strong, independent woman, and you know, that's what I've taken away from her story. So she retired in 1950 and she passed away in 1971 at the ripe old age of 83 years old. I mean, snaps for Miss Violet, snaps for Miss Unsinkable. What a badass boss bitch. Like, honestly, Violet's story is filled with survival and perseverance and just having strength in times of, you know, tragedy and uncertainty. And I think that, you know, especially right now as a woman, I think we need inspiring stories like Violet's, because she truly was Miss Unsinkable. I mean, me personally, I would have called it quits after, you know, the incident on the Olympic, but I am not a badass boss bitch like Violet Jessop, and I am certainly not Miss Unsinkable in that way, but I am certainly Miss Unsinkable in other areas of my life. And I think we can all, you know, take that message from Violet's story. So let me know what you guys thought of this okay coincidence in the comments, and let me know what I should talk about next time, because I have a list that I'm already compiling, but your ideas might not be on my list. So let me know what I should talk about next. What other crazy coincidences I should talk about, because okay coincidence. Anyways, I will see you next time on my next video, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, your week, your month, your year, your morning, your afternoon, your evening, whenever you're watching this. And I love you guys so much. And I'm OK Miller. OK Miller out.